Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's session. This afternoon's session title is Bringing Regional Broadband to Rural Communities and Regions. My name is Brett Alphin. I'm the Development Director at Buckeye Hills Regional Council, located in Marietta, Ohio. And if you must know, I was really hoping to welcome you all to Cleveland, Ohio for the NADO conference this fall. Even more secret than that, I was hoping there would be a Cleveland Indians, Cincinnati Reds World Series that we could all attend during the conference as well. But alas, here we are with our NATO friends talking about broadband. Many regional development organizations across the country recognize the important role that broadband has in their regions, connecting businesses to customers, keeping families and friends in touch with loved ones, and allowing students to learn and grow. Increasingly, many RDOs are including broadband connectivity as a component in their comprehensive economic development strategies. However, in rural communities across the nation, broadband connectivity is still notoriously weak, unreliable, and in many cases, completely non-existent. Bringing reliable, high-speed connections to rural areas is costly, logistically complicated, meaning that our regions struggle to attract those investments for broadband infrastructure and related policies. Today's session will provide some examples of the ways RDOs and communities have implemented projects to expand and improve their internet and mobile connectivity, and in some cases, incorporated broadband into regional strategies. Our first speaker today will be Carrie Pipnich, the Senior Project Manager at Mid-Columbia Economic Development District in Oregon. Carrie came to Mid-Columbia as a Rural Resource Assistance for Rural Environments AmeriCorps participant in 2011, and joined the MC-EDD staff as a project manager immediately following. In 2020, she was promoted to the role of Senior Project Manager. Her work at MC-EDD currently comprises serving as the lead staff for the Wasco County Economic Development Commission and Sherman County Economic Development, in addition to working with communities and businesses throughout the region to support broadband access and utilization through the Columbia Gorge Broadband Consortium. As the Senior Project Manager, she is responsible for the oversight of the entire project management team at MC-EDD and for strategic direction in relation to the implementation of the comprehensive economic development strategy. So Carrie, thank you for joining us today. I apologize if I did your last name a disservice, but please take it away.
No, you did great. It's exactly how it looks. Well, thank you all for having me. I'm excited to talk about this topic. It's one that's near and dear to my heart, and I think really critical to the work that we all do in our communities across the country. So as noted, I'm the Senior Project Manager at McKen. We're located in the Dalles, Oregon. We serve a 5-county region straddling the Oregon and Washington border, Skamania and Klickitat counties in Washington, and Hanover, Wasco, and Sherman counties in Oregon. Our focus is really around supporting family wage jobs, growing our economic base, and supporting growth and retention of business and industry within our region. So how does broadband fit into that? I think today, more than ever, we all understand that broadband really is critical infrastructure, and that it, along with all of those other pieces, are really important to providing economic opportunity in the communities that we serve. We work to support that infrastructure development in partnership with all of our local partners, both public and private, throughout the region. So the language on the slide is from our comprehensive economic development strategy and sort of how we guide our broadband work. We started this in the early 2000s and have continued to grow and develop it as the conditions have changed in our communities. We really focus on addressing underserved areas and unserved areas, supporting growing access at critical facilities, including things like communications towers that can help expand that service print. Not just having that access, but supporting redundant networks, increasing speeds available to our businesses and residents, and reducing latency in particular for some of those tech businesses in our region is really critical. We try to take a technology neutral approach to this work with a focus on scalable infrastructure that can serve our communities into the future. And I'm going to put a plug in. We'll talk a little bit more about this later. We focused a lot on the infrastructure for broadband, but without talking about how we can use that, I think we're really missing a critical piece to the puzzle for how we can reap the benefits of that infrastructure investment. So what does that look like in our region? We do have some really big challenges around access. And I will apologize, you're gonna have to look at some nice shots of our region. It's a really wonderful place to live and be, so bear with me with those. But challenges we really face in our area, as you can see from some of these slides, we're a very rural region. We cover about 7,300 square miles, which has really difficult terrain, lots of canyons, rolling hills, forests, that can all create really big issues with how to deploy broadband infrastructure. In addition to that, we have a really dispersed population. We have about communities from about 15,000 down to just a handful of residents. We have really large farming and ranching operations in our area that spread out those residences across the landscape and make it really challenging to access them in a way that's cost effective. And we also have a lot of federal lands in our counties, some more than others, but permitting and crossing those lands to get to these communities can be really challenging in some places and really cost prohibitive for some of our internet service providers to address that. But oops, we did 2 slides. We do see a lot of opportunities around this as well. So key industry sectors in our area, value-added agriculture, I think more and more we're seeing our ag producers really leveraging technology and connectivity to increase yields and efficiency in how they operate. We're also seeing some of our key sectors, manufacturers, high tech. We have a focus on main systems in this region and our healthcare providers that are really big economic and employment drivers in our area. And even in normal times, they couldn't locate in a community that doesn't have this kind of infrastructure. And then sort of the basic opportunities as well, thinking about our workforce, making sure that our educational providers, training opportunities, and all of the basic services that use broadband today are accessible to our residents and businesses. And I would make a quick note, even before COVID, and the significant increase in working from home, we really saw a lot of our employers and employees really expecting connectivity at home, not just at the office, which as our communities grow smaller, it becomes harder and harder to make that business case for broadband access. We also have a lot of home-based businesses pre-COVID, and I imagine that will continue to grow and change as we all adapt to this new world. But that need, as I noted, to residents is really critical, and especially in a region, like I'm sure many of you see in your areas, we have a lot of housing challenges related to affordability and just unit production to meet our needs here. And increasing connectivity to more housing stock can really help support both increased value for those homes and support for our local governments, as well as more opportunities for folks to locate and grow their families here. So how do we do this work? We really focus on this community engagement model to help understand the needs on the ground and come together to address them. Like as a result of that inclusion in our comprehensive economic development strategy, we've really been able to leverage our staff time and energy to be able to support active community partners in those local conversations that have allowed us to be prepared to seek opportunities for funding as it becomes available. There are a lot of folks looking at this sort of community-based model these days. I think they've got a much cooler name for it right now. I know our Washington State partners are calling them Broadband Action Teams, or BATS, which is a lot more fun than my community engagement model title. But essentially, it's the same idea, looking at creating a community level work group thinking about those partners who should be at the table. And I think really thinking broadly about that is really critical. Each of those different partners may serve a different population in your community. They come with different funder relationships that all help put those pieces of the puzzle together in terms of understanding the need out there and the opportunities to address it. So in addition to your economic development partners would strongly encourage you to think about public safety, education, healthcare provision, all of those pieces and many more bringing to the table to really try to better understand what's going on in the community. I think that allows you to aggregate that demand for service in each of your communities you're working with, as well as understand what those assets are. Where there's a community institution that might need service can help drive that infrastructure investment. And I think it also brings, like I said, those relationships to the table. Those allow you to put together project ideas and start to explore feasibility. And having that ready to go as funding opportunities arise is really critical, because those are going to come and go quickly. And so you have to be able to have those relationships at the table and be able to act quickly. We've used this with the communities across our region, and some of it's been really successful and some of it's been more challenging, but truly thinking about that engaged community, developing champions for these projects and this need at that local level is really going to help provide a foundation for success in addressing this. I will note too, it is a time-sensitive and time-intensive process. Those relationship building pieces are really critical. So a couple of case studies I will walk through. We'll start with Maupin, which is a town of about 450 located about 40 miles south of the largest community in our region. As you can probably tell from the picture on the slide, it is really pretty isolated in terms of access to our larger population center and critical infrastructure. So we started conversations about how to improve access in Maupin and across Wasco County where it's located. They've been having conversations for a long time, but sort of this current iteration in 2012 began with county level planning and dove in identifying this area as a critical gap. And started developing a concept for how to address this, focusing first on bringing fiber to the community to help support a more robust local network, and looking at the demand for that with all of those different partners at the table. We were able to find some public investment from the state of Oregon through the Regional Solutions Program, invested about $410,000 that kind of got the ball really rolling with this project, and helped us identify a local partner that's a private internet service provider that turned out was able to leverage us a contract for a cell tower and the school to bring fiber into the community. And then we were able to pivot and look at investing that resource and growing that pool to do a fiber to the home build there. Partners for this that really made this happen, the city of Maupin itself, and then Q Life, which is an intergovernmental agency formed by the county and the city of the Dalles, which is the largest community in the county, to do some fiber investment in the Dalles, was then able to leverage that structure to provide a conduit and expertise to help build out that network. So about $1.5 million and 8 funding sources later, in 2019, they completed construction of a fiber to the home network there that's publicly owned, and then partners with private internet service providers to actually provide that last mile service. So they have better internet access there than I have at my home. It's in the largest community in the region. So really exciting to see that shift. And as I noted on the slide, a couple of really critical takeaways, being able to pull together those partners and that demand to tell the story of the need, collaborating with those public and private entities to help leverage those investments. And then this was a very long process. So persistence and those local champions that kind of keep the project going are really critical. The next slide here, looking at Sherman County, the neighboring county. This is a county that's about 2 people per square mile, about 1,800 folks. They've been working on broadband there since the mid-2000s. They started leveraging assets like grain towers and their public safety infrastructure communications towers to help support building out a wireless network that served the entire county when they weren't getting traction or really economic feasibility for a wired infrastructure investment. And they completed that. And after they built those big backbones, they worked with residents and sort of allocated a per household amount to help support building out repeaters. Some of those really big canyons that were in some of the earlier slides are located in Sherman County. It's very windy, so folks tend to locate in those canyons for that protection from the elements. And so that was a really critical piece for that to help build the infrastructure out for the wireless system. A few years ago, they came to us and it's been a priority for them for years. It's been something they continue to keep as a high priority every year when they look at what the county priorities are. But they came to us and said, "We don't think the infrastructure we have is adequate right now to meet our needs." If you look at the graphs of folks using internet and the bandwidth we all use, it's exponential growth. And so that wireless system we had built is just not cutting it anymore. So we worked with them to facilitate some community surveys, community meetings, brought public partners together, community partners to look at what that need was, and all of that backed up the need for additional service. So in 2017, we started that process. And the next year, we facilitated a conversation with the 4 cities in that county and the county itself to discuss what a strategy for a solution was, and decided to do a request for proposals that we sent out pretty widely and had several private providers respond to that. Just kind of looking for a solution. What's the best way to meet this need? Laying out that need for the community and why, and that request for proposals. And they wound up, the partners for the project wound up choosing it to work with a private internet service provider. They felt like they didn't want to do that service provision themselves. And they, through working with that private provider, they spent about $650,000 total, with about half of that investment private, and the other half coming from the county, the cities, and then again, that regional solutions pool of funding that's really flexible from the state to build out fiber to the home in all 4 of the cities. And then also one of the commercial hubs is on its way in conjunction with the water system build coming up. This was able to also reduce traffic on their wireless network to help support broader access there. And then with COVID, really highlighted some of those gaps that were still missing in that wireless system, and they were able to apply for some CARES Act funding the state was administering to address some of these broadband gaps. We got another $160,000 or so to look at upgrades to the wireless system to help provide more bandwidth through that, and then also adding some mobile repeaters with solar panels on them that they could position out in the country where it made the most sense to try to get to some of these folks that were still missing wireless service. So I think they are really close in Sherman County to coverage all over the county. So exciting opportunity, and one I think that highlights that clear vision of this is a priority, and continued work to pick away at the edges of it has really been a valuable piece. And then a reminder to leverage those existing assets that are in the community to help support those investments. So this next one will be quick, but I did want to touch on a COVID related piece. I think we are in a really agriculturally based region. Cherry harvest is a huge thing in our area. The community I live in almost doubles in size every year. In the summer is our migrant and seasonal farm workers come in to help with harvest. And our growers, and this usually starts in June, our growers were dealing with a really quickly shifting landscape of regulation related to their on-site housing, the services they provide, the transportation they can provide between sites and to services and communities. So just a lot of moving pieces. But one of the things that they identified, and some of the folks that work closely with them identified, was a need for more broadband access at the housing that's on site to be able to support those workers coming in, to be able to better access telemedicine services, as well as supporting the education service district in their migrant education program that they provide every year to students that are traveling with their families every summer. And all of those normal things that we access all the time, banking, email, all those pieces to stay in touch. And so they were able to work with our local incident command, a social services nonprofit, and our extension to all come together to identify some solutions. And we're able to get hotspot access to almost all of the workers. I will note we have spotty cell coverage here, so it turned out it took 3 different cell providers contracts to get access out to all of those locations, and a few of them still were missing it, but we have been able to use that to identify some of those locations where there's going to be a need for some additional infrastructure investment to make it happen. And I think that's a takeaway I want folks to be really thinking about too, is that we have a whole bunch of partners in our communities that are now gathering information on who has access to broadband and who doesn't. That's much more accurate than some of the mapping strategies that are out there at the broader level. So thinking about ways to build those relationships and leverage that data, I think, can really help us all think about moving the needle on this key issue. So the last sort of case study I've got here, will be a quick one. Just wanted to highlight, as I noted, utilization is really the end goal here. How do our communities and businesses use this to support economic opportunity and growth? And we've been doing for a few years now, hosting WebWorks conversations in partnership with our local Small Business Development Center, who can develop some of the more technical content, and our chambers to help really distribute the word and identify some of those key gaps for our businesses. Not all of this, the opportunities to leverage broadband infrastructure for business development, for marketing, all of those pieces are necessarily intuitive to some of our smaller businesses. So we're really excited to be continuing with that. And we've always tried to incorporate into that both the content from the Small Business Development Center, as well as some key example businesses from our communities that do that skill that you're teaching well, so that it's a little bit more approachable, and you've been able to access private foundation funding as well as state and federal support to do those pieces. So keep that one in mind as you're looking at your broadband strategies as well. Last one here is just a big plug. We've twice a year, we get a group together of our private internet service providers, our governmental entities looking at this issue, community partners, to really have a conversation about investments that are happening, funding opportunities that are coming up, and what's going on with those local planning efforts. And it's provided a space where we can all learn from each other and approaches that are happening at the local level, so that we're not reinventing the wheel. And you know, from the example from Maupin, you know, it was an 8-year process to get a project from concept to finish. So having this sort of network of folks that are doing similar work and understand what you're going through, I think, can be really critical to keeping those local champions motivated and moving forward as well. So just a quick sum up, key takeaways. Incorporating broadband into those regional and local strategies can really help make sure that you're positioned well to invest your time and energy into this key infrastructure need, as well as help set you up better for funding resources And I would think broadly about that. We've got it in our SEDS, thinking about incorporating it into our local community-based strategic plans, your comprehensive land use plans, hazard mitigation, all of those different kinds of pieces can bring different funding resources and partners to the table as you move forward with this. And then thinking, as I noted, creatively and broadly about those partnerships. Those relationships and resources are really valuable to think about in a holistic way to meet your community needs. And then being ready, starting the conversation early and continuing it and sort of developing those projects early can help you really be ready to take advantage of resources as they become available. And then this space for that regional conversation we found super valuable. A lot of our internet service providers work at the regional level. A lot of our communities can learn from each other. So I think that is what I have for you today. I hope that's helpful to give a context for how we do that work and appreciate the time to talk about it. Thanks, Brett.
Carrie, thank you for sharing with us today. I want to remind the folks that are tuning in today that if you have questions, please type them in the chat box. We're going to have plenty of time at the end of the session for questions and answers with both Carrie and our next speaker, Jim. So with that, I would like to introduce our next speaker. Next, we're going to hear from Jim Baldwin. Jim is the Executive Director of the Cumberland Plateau Planning District Commission in Virginia. Jim has been with Cumberland Plateau since 1972. He's a member of the NADO Board of Directors and previously served as the President of the Development District Association of Appalachia. Jim is a member of many other boards, including the Crooked Road, Round the Mountain, Southwest Virginia Cultural Heritage Foundation, the Coalfield Water Development Fund, and the Virginia Coalfield Economic Development Authority. With that, I turn it over to my friend Jim, and take it away, sir.
Thank you, Brett. It's very good to be with everybody, even though it would be wonderful if we were in Cleveland. Even without the Indians and the Reds, you know, we could find a lot of things to do at the Rock and Roll Museum, which would be one of my first visits. So, but you know, things have not happened in this country that allow us to do that. So we're on virtual. I don't know about most people here. I think this is my 5th conference call / Zoom meeting today. Some of my staff have been on those, but it's sort of the, you know, the new normal. But I'll try to be as succinct as I can and get through this in due time so we can have some questions. You know, the pandemic has really brought broadband even more to the forefront because of, especially in rural areas, because of the challenges that our rural communities are facing in virtual learning, getting kids back in school, teleworking opportunities for our business community, and telemedicine opportunities for our citizens, because we live in a very remote region with a lot of terrain challenges to get from place to place. So, you know, it's a timely topic, even more so than normal. And if you could advance the slide, Brett, I'd appreciate it. I was sitting around a couple of weeks ago thinking of, okay, I've got this presentation to make about rural broadband, and what am I going to call it? Well, for some reason, the term from soup to nuts kept coming up, and I'm a foodaholic anyway, and I also thought we might be able to add just a little bit of humor to the presentation by using that title. So the thing that came to mind immediately was, okay, I get the soup, but I'm not absolutely sure where nuts come into play. So I did my Google search and found out that it's an American term for the progression of a full course meal. So still I was thinking, okay, we can get from soup, but how do we get to the nuts part? And it brought another memory to mind that my wife, who is half Italian, her full Italian father used to talk about his Sunday afternoons in downtown Boston as a kid, afternoon meal with his mother cooking and several neighbors and relatives coming for dinner, and that he had to keep the Victrola going after they finally got through several courses. They wanted to listen to opera. So while they were listening to opera as adult family, he was wanting to get outside to play. But you know, at some point, I remember him talking about towards the end of the meal or after the meal, they always had a course of nuts. So that's the soup to nuts term. So I did a little bit more looking on Google, and there was a comedy link. And let's face it, during the pandemic, a little bit of humor goes a long way. You know, a lot of us are now able to stay up a little later and watch some of the late night shows and, you know, come out with a smile on our face. There was also a 1928 movie with Laurel and Hardy called Soup to Nuts. There was a 1930 Three Stooges production around that whole progression of a meal. This was prior to them becoming formally the Three Stooges. I don't know what they were called then, but then in 1944, there was a Duck Soup to Nuts starring Daffy Duck and Porky Pig. If I'd had time to practice my voices, I could have really added a lot of humor to this presentation, but just try to imagine that. And then more recent, there's been Mama's Family. It has had episodes about the whole deal of soup to nuts. There was a comic strip, Soup to Nuts. The idea being in rural broadband, you know, you start out maybe with the ingredients for soup, and it takes a long time to get to the nuts and then to the opera or whatever you might do after that meal. So I felt like it was an appropriate title for the Cumberland Plateau's journey in rural broadband. If you could go to the next slide, Brett. Our private partner in our effort is a company out of rural Georgia called Point Broadband, an appropriate partner for us in a public privately owned system. We own 50% of our Cumberland Plateau broadband system. Point Broadband, which is a fairly new partner, 2 years old, a little over, is from rural Georgia. The company was started by the family patriarch who brought a telephone back from the World's Fair from New York sometime in the early 1900s, and they've become a pretty amazing story in rural broadband circles. So we're now engaged in a partnership with Point Broadband, which is part of our story. If you could advance the slide. I ask them to do this because every time I touch a button to advance a slide, the whole thing disappears. So I figured it would be safer to have Brett and the NADO folks do that. This map gives you a little bit of perspective on where we are. That's a map of the eastern United States from the Mississippi east. And you see, we show up fairly prominently in that map. We are a little larger than Rhode Island in terms of square miles. And I noticed that Carrie gave her the square miles of her district as some 7,000 square miles. Well, ours is 1,800 and a little over in square miles. But if you add the terrain, the mountain surface in our very, very mountainous coalfield region, we might even get close to that. But that also, you know, gives you some perspective on where we are, and we can go to the next slide. This is a terrain map. If knowing the size of our district, you can see from the northern 2/3 is very mountainous. You know, we're on the border with West Virginia and Eastern Kentucky, Central Appalachia personified. I remember when I first started working at the planning district, they were working on a district-wide land use plan, and got a lot of statistics together, one of which I thought was pretty amazing was that 70% of the land area in the Cumberland Plateau Planning District is above a 20-degree slope, which really makes economic development, any kind of development really, a real challenge. It certainly added some tremendous challenges when we decided to get involved in a rural broadband project. You can go to the next slide. Sorry, I've got a lot of maps, but I had them and I thought, well, that's about as good a way to depict where we are as anything. You know, and this will be up just for a little while, but when we started out, my predecessors, Andy Chafin and Larry Carr, and a lot of other folks in local government were trying to figure out how our region could leap into the 21st century economy. And pretty quickly, we realized that we did not have the broadband infrastructure that was going to allow that. Some studies were done, and we had some good information. And it was sort of like a group of mad scientists around a cauldron. They hooked up with a gentleman who was the Virginia rep for the EDA, a gentleman named Neil Noyes, who quickly talked to us about trying to provide and find some EDA funding to get this project started. And the impetus for it was that in Russell County, which is the lower left-hand county in their district, I don't have the county boundaries there, but if you can see Lebanon, a little yellow pin sticking in the map, there was opportunity for to recruit two major IT industries, CGI and Northrop Grumman, to this 30 small Central Appalachian town, Lebanon, a population of about 3,200, and that was dependent upon bringing high-speed broadband to the region. So that first phase of that project to get that broadband over to Lebanon from Abingdon, from a municipal provider that we were required to partner with. We didn't know anything about broadband and running a broadband network. That turned into be the first phase of a 4-phase project that now provides a lot of the blue, light blue backbone into our region. Some of that's overlapped by the green and red lines that you see there. I'll talk about those in a minute. But that backbone project, the 4 phases, allowed us to provide 100 gigabit service, 2 pipes to Ashland in Virginia and Atlanta to the south, to provide the redundancy for those kinds of high-tech firms that were being wooed to our region. So, you know, we can look back and say, if we'd known what we know now, we may never have started that suit, because it took now 18, 19 years of planning and implementation, construction, and everything else to get us to where we are today. And there have been some side trips along the way, which we talk about just in a minute. But those mad scientists that were around that cauldron, it took a lot of ingredients to get the soup going, and not the least of which was the support of local governments. And I think all around the country, my colleagues in regional development organizations, if they could say anything great that they've done, it's been the ability to bring their regions together, their individual local governments together. The ethic that our communities have to cooperate, and that's part of this title of this session, has really made these kinds of projects, have brought them to fruition. If had been any single community trying to get this done, it would never have happened. But you know, we can look back and really look to those leaders 18, 19 years ago, and the foresight that they showed to help us get to where we are today. Well, along the way, that soup, you know, we got the ingredients in, we finished it up, the ingredients part, but the key ingredient came with the salad, and that was the green leafy greens that we needed, that are for the funding part of this project. We needed to put together a project that eventually ended up in bringing about $65 million in federal and state and regional funding to build what is now about a 500-mile backbone system, getting ready to explode, hopefully, into the areas on the map in the red and green, with some major new projects to provide fiber to the home. Our EDA grants and Tobacco Commission in Virginia provided local match for those federal funds. We could only hook up businesses, industries, and institutions. And with that project, we ended up with about 1,000 customers of business, industry, and institutions. Very few residential, just the ones that we could pick up on the way to a industrial site or, you know, off of our backbone. But recently, with the acquisition of a large regional broadband system by Point Broadband, our 50% ownership in that system has enabled us to partner with Point Broadband to take a step towards really dramatically growing our broadband network. So, you know, getting to where we are today, the blue shows backbone, but it also shows some middle mile. Those were the sides to our full course dinner. We had to have some help along the way to help make that meal even more pleasant, to head towards dessert, which in this case is going to be the ability to provide high-speed internet services to the majority of our very mountainous, remote district. You know, the hotspots were one of the keys to, I think, us being asked to participate, and perhaps the lady before me too. And we are kind of in between our backbone and our full-fledged residential deployment. So hotspots seem to be a little bit of dessert to go with what we'd already accomplished and sort of carry us over to the nuts portion of our meal, which is sort of, you know, the final piece. We realized that we weren't going to be able to get to our folks very quickly. We're hoping to do that, you know, over a period of 3 or 4 years, but even with that, that's a long time to wait. So in the meantime, our board developed a proposal with our partner Point Broadband to deploy hotspots in our region. If you go to the next slide, Brett. This is a little network map the green lines are our backbone. We have the Wi-Fi hotspots in bluish and goldish circles. I think there are about 13 or 14 on this map, but we've got several more in the planning stages. So we worked with each county to come up with location for the hotspots that were sort of the first line, more critical spots, downtowns near some of our more remote schools, where we could provide a hotspot to at least provide a reasonably convenient option for folks who didn't have broadband at home. You'll notice too, another little side track we took from our meal was to work with the Virginia Coalfield Coalition, which we're a member of, and the state tobacco commission and a carrier, major carrier, to provide Wi-Fi, I'm trying to think of the correct term, but the higher speed cell opportunities, cell towers, 4G, I'm sorry. So we were able to work with the major carrier and provided backhaul services because of this major system to 27 existing cell towers, and we actually worked with our neighboring PDC Lennowisco to the west to build 11 new towers, which greatly improved cell service in our remote mountainous region to give 4G service, one of the first 4G operations in a rural community in America. So, there's been a whole lot that has been done. We've got a whole lot going right now. If you wouldn't mind to go back to the previous slide, we're working with Point Broadband to extend into our rural communities. The red is our lines that we have proposed to build through some state funding, and the green are communities and areas to be served through the CAF2 program. Point Broadband was awarded a major CAF2 grant. So when all of this is done, all of the red and green will turn blue and will indicate, our nearly fully built broadband network. So that's a little bit of background on where we are. The real additional benefit from this system, which our main goal was to get high-speed broadband services to our business, industry, and institutional customers and to our residents, was also we're able now to provide some funding because of our 50% ownership position with Point Broadband. Portion of the revenues can be reinvested in our communities and economic development. So I'll finish with that, and it's been a pleasure to be with you.
Jim, thank you for that, and thanks for folks for hanging on with us. We do have a couple questions in the box here that I'd like to run through. So Carrie, if you could join us on camera again as well. Thank you. First question is for Carrie, and it says, can you elaborate more on what broadband looks like in your SEDS? Do you have a separate section, or is it listed as part of the strategies?
So we have an infrastructure section in the SEDS, and that's divided out into several key pieces. So there's a transportation section, a water and wastewater section, and then a broadband section. So we've got specific sort of focus areas there, and then that plays out into our sort of strategies for implementation as we move forward. And I can pop I don't know if I can actually do that. I can pop a link to it into the chat box too, if that's helpful for folks.
All right, the next question is either for Carrie or Jim. Which federal agencies have been the most supportive for your efforts in broadband?
Well, I don't mind to answer that. I've already mentioned them. The U.S. Department of Commerce Economic Development Administration has been there since the very beginning, and around 2002 when we really started seriously talking about developing a broadband network in our region. You know, over the years too, we've had support from the Appalachian Regional Commission, but probably, you know, from our standpoint, the investment of the Virginia Tobacco Commission was a key, because in order to get the EDA and ARC funding, we had to have match, and our localities in 2002 and 3 would have been very hard stretched to come up with the several $1 million in match that would have been required that Tobacco Commission provided. So we've gotten some rural development funds, some local regional economic development funds, the Virginia Coalfield Economic Development Authority and others, but EDA was certainly the catalyst.
And I think we've been able to leverage our planning grant time to support some staff work on this. I think in terms of infrastructure investment, none of the projects I mentioned had federal investment. I think it's been really challenging with the geography we have to get the accurate mapping enough to be able to really look at qualifying for those federal resources in a way that gives enough certainty to help support the significant upfront investment that is required to do those applications. USDA and some of the other big funding sources. We've seen, we did have a large ARA era investment on the Washington side of the river in our region that helped provide a really strong backbone that's been really helpful in getting better connectivity to the communities along the river there. And then I will say, despite some of the challenges in accessing those funding sources, I think USDA has always been at the table and willing to be a good partner in conversation and talking about strategies. So I just want to be appreciative of that engagement as well.
Thanks for that, Carrie and Jim. This is an interesting question. So these projects take a very long time. How did you, that's an understatement, right? How did you and are you keeping partners together and focused on the outcome?
I don't mind to start out, Carrie. You know, and I alluded to this in my comments. The board of directors of Cumberland Plateau Planning District is made up of local elected officials and citizens who have been, you know, partnering with us since 1968 on infrastructure projects like water and sewer and industrial sites and industrial parks. And they know us and they see the results of collaboration and cooperation. And we had some fairly challenging problems to solve, especially the last 5-6 years. And, you know, the board of directors of Cumberland Plateau came to multiple meetings. I told them, you know, a lot of them were newly elected. I said, you probably didn't sign up for this, but we've got some major issues in broadband, and it's going to take some time and effort. And we had 3 or 4 times the number of meetings that we normally have, you know, during our regular schedules, and they never missed. They were there and they were engaged and they were committed. And you know, I'm not saying this because maybe a couple of them are on the call today or have come to the conference, but really, you can't do this kind of work without good leadership from your board of directors. And they come from counties. The counties supported us, and towns. So that was never an issue. That was never our challenge.
So I don't think we've had a project that's lasted 19 years. So I will echo what Jim is saying around having that really strong leadership and engagement in those processes. And I think too, some of those regional meetings, we've had a much more sort of grassroots approach, I think, in our region than some of the work that Jim's been able to do. And having those regional meetings and those check-ins a couple times a year has really helped, I think, folks feel a connection to the other people in the region that are doing that work and not feeling like they're off on their own trying to solve this really sticky issue by themselves. I think that's been really helpful, and I just think some of the continued sort of ongoing staff capacity to help push things along too, I think has been really valuable.
So there's another question here, and it's actually it says this for Carrie, but I think either of you could answer. Have your regional broadband groups discussed digital inclusion or digital literacy? And do you think a SEDS should include these items in addition to the broadband expansion for economic development?
So I guess I'll take a stab. We don't have anything in particular related to broader digital inclusion and digital literacy in our SEDS. But we found a really valuable partnership is working with our local libraries. That's where people go to get help with broadband access a lot of times. Folks that don't have access at their homes or need a little bit of extra help with a piece of technology or figuring out their laptop often go to the library to get that help from those librarians. They have a really good sense of what those needs are in their communities. And we have definitely built that into some of our grant requests, partnering with a local entity, whether it's the library or a community group. We have a really wonderful partner, Community Engagement for Klickitat County, that's a nonprofit that serves both Klickitat and Skamania, that helps really dive into some of those nitty-gritty issues. And we've also been having conversations with some of our chambers about whether we need to start at that digital literacy level to help some of our really small businesses figure out how to take advantage of this infrastructure for the business side of things as well. So I think it's important to keep in the back of mind, but we haven't formally included that in our SEDS beyond the business specific training.
I don't have anything really to add to that. We have not included digital literacy in any of our work, but it's something to think about and work on for us.
I might too, just really quick add, I think that's one thing that COVID's really emphasizes as we think about some of our broader work and that community engagement on some of these other issues and big topics that are involved in our strategy. I think that digital literacy piece and that digital inclusion, making sure that some of our stakeholders have access to those processes is going to be a really important thing as we move through the last 6 or 7 months and into the next year or so as well.
Yeah, I think once we have our system built out, we are so concentrated on trying to get fiber to folks that we just haven't had the opportunity or maybe seen a lot of demand for that. But I agree that it's something we should be looking at.
Well, Jim, from past experience, if you start that conversation before the infrastructure is there, you get a lot of really grumpy community members.
They're already a little grumpy.
Yeah.
So we've got 1 or 2 more, and I'm gonna press us into overtime because I think one of these is a really good question, and it's this one. And in our work in Ohio, we are asking ourselves this question all the time, and that is, what are your advice or best practices to approaching ISPs who currently aren't able to make a business case for areas outside of small towns or city limits? This is a huge issue for us.
Well, we would say build your own, I guess. But That's an interesting question, because I think the stars aligned for us in a lot of ways. You know, the group of individuals that were in leadership positions that were willing to take a risk to get this project in our neck of the woods going. I'm not sure where you would start now and with what organization, whether or not you could replicate what we've done. I'm not sure, but I think the time is right to look into that. If I were in the shoes of my colleagues in areas that are having that issue with ISPs not able to commit because of sparse population issues and that sort of thing, is start talking to your federal and state economic development community and say, you know, we need this. Everybody in this country now knows the value of high-speed broadband. What can we do to serve our residents and citizens?
You know, and I think the place that we've had the best luck, and I will say that is still a challenge we have here. I think there are some areas where we've been really successful, and some areas that we're still trying to figure out how to meet one of those gaps, in particular those areas outside of communities. And the place that we've had the best luck, I think, has really been that Sherman County example that I shared. And the county and its partners, public partners, invested pretty heavily in that public safety network that put towers throughout the county and partnered with the local grain co-op to use some of those grain towers. So thinking about some of those public assets that you might have, and they invested in some of the initial equipment to help build out that wireless network. And then are working with an internet service provider that provides them a fee essentially per connection they serve to help reinvest in that network, but also get that service out to those residents outside of town. And I think that's probably been the most successful model that we have locally for that. Beyond, I think the one I didn't really talk a lot about, we have one electric co-op in the region, the Hood River Electric Co-op, that has a wholly owned broadband business, Ash, that does a mix of wireless and fiber outside of the community's center. And they're able to leverage their electric utility business, I think, to help the infrastructure pieces of that. So I think finding opportunities with partners like that too could be a really valuable strategy.
Brad, I might quickly add, you know, we were able to get a backbone system put into place. Now, you know, it's open access. Point Broadband's our immediate partner, but there are plenty of other providers in our region that now, because of our backbone, have the opportunity to look at some more cost-effective extensions of and deployment of backbone to communities that you know, they have an interest in. So it's really opening a lot of opportunities for residential service in our region.
And I'll close with one comment to the person that asked this question. We just in our region, we just started asking, and one of the challenges that I think you will find is, even if they have no intention of serving an area, a provider will always say that they could. And so part of our message has been like the Jerry Maguire, like help us, help you. And so we're willing to say, we've seen for the last 25 years that you're probably not going to provide service in this area. Maybe it's time for us to consider an alternative way to provide service to these communities. And they're not always excited about that, but it's almost like we're ripping off the Band-Aid when some of these folks are perpetually wanting to say, no, we could, or we can, or we will, and we're just trying to step on the gas pedal for some of those conversations. So I think that's, if you're having this conversation, be prepared for that as well. So with that, I want to thank Jim, and I want to thank Carrie for spending your time with us today. This is informative. For folks that are still with us, I would encourage you, if you have additional questions, please connect with Jim and Carrie directly. Their information is available in the conference materials, and I'm sure you can get it from NADO as well. So I want to thank you both for joining us today. I would like to remind folks that you know, this concludes the first day of the conference. The sessions will resume tomorrow morning at 11:30 with a plenary session about lessons learned from 2020 that will help RDOs shape their organizations and workforces for the next 20 years. So with that, I give you my thanks. Thank you for your attention today. Jim and Carrie, thanks again, and we'll look forward to speaking with you all tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you.